Now, good evening. Guten Abend, everyone. Erev Tov. My name is Elad Lapidot. I am a professor for Jewish Studies at the University of Lille and one of the people who is running the program that is called the Berlin Center for Intellectual Diaspora at the Katholische Akademie Berlin here. The purpose, the goal of this program, the Berlin Center for Intellectual Diaspora, is to create a space, a forum for to bring researchers, intellectuals, writers, artists to discuss and exchange around issues that are of contemporary importance, that are on the meeting place between culture, religion, politics, society. And one of the important elements of this program is that we try to do so to think about current contemporary concerns with a look back into different cultural, intellectual traditions that animate our contemporary societies. And in this endeavor, we have different inspirations and precursors that inspired us and continue to do so. One of these central inspiration is sitting with us today. Professor Daniel Boyarin, who, as you see, continues to inspire us and be a part of this center. There are different ways in which we draw, I personally also in my work draw inspiration from Daniel Boyarin. I will only mention now two of them. One of them is the concept of diaspora, which sits at the very center of our center. And Daniel Boyarin is one of the important intellectuals that who have been in recent decades thinking, rethinking, claiming, reclaiming, reinterpreting the concept of diaspora and making it a central concept of thinking culture and also politics today. A second way in which Daniel Boyarin's inspiration is concerns this act of thinking the present through the past, or trying to understand and reflect about contemporary cultural, political concerns with a look back into traditions. And Daniel Boyarin has done so in many ways. One of the central ways is looking back into Jewish and more specifically rabbinic intellectual tradition, the Talmud. And in this way, we are inspired by him. And this is also the reason why I was so grateful to Chana Omri ben Yehuda when she suggested that we consecrate, that we dedicate an evening to one of Daniel Boyarin's books. Maybe Chana Omri, you can show the book, Carnal Israel, a book that in the early 90s attempted to engage in an ongoing conversation that still is ongoing today on questions of sexuality, body, and the question of gender through readings in the Talmudic literature. So this is a perfect example of what I was talking about, trying to think the present through the past. And this year we celebrate 30 years to the publication of this book, and this evening is dedicated to that. So I will quickly present more in detail Daniel Boyarin to you, and then also Chana Omri, and then I will hand over Chana Omri the stage to conduct this conversation. So Daniel Boyarin, as I said, is now an emeritus professor, Taubman professor of Talmudic Culture and Rhetoric at UC Berkeley. He has held different fellowships in different institutes, won many prizes, a long list that I will not read to you now. He has written extensively on Talmudic and Midrashic studies And his work, as I said, is focused on cultural studies in rabbinic Judaism, including issues of gender and sexuality, as well as research on the Jews as colonized people and lately colonizing people. I should say that Daniel Boyarin is one of the important names, one of the central Jewish intellectuals today, definitely one of the central leading voices in Jewish studies. His most recent research interests centered primarily around questions of the relationship of Judaism and Christianity in late antiquity. The book today is about that, and the genealogy of the concepts of religion and Judaism. Lately, he has been thinking extensively about diaspora as a political, cultural ideal, and his most recent book is The No-State Solution, a Jewish manifesto that came out this year. Chana Omri Ben Yehuda is a scholar of modern Jewish literatures in the University of Lille. She's the author of 2 books, a collection of essays edited in collaboration with Dotan Halevi, Israel's Heterotopy, Gaza in Israeli Politics and Culture, that is published now.
Yeah, it's among you. You can see it. It's somewhere in the audience.
The book is somewhere in the audience. You can look at it when you wish. And she currently works on a new book, the Bibi book, The Politics and Magic Making of Benjamin Netanyahu. So, Chana Omri, please.
Thank you so much, and I'm very happy about this occasion, and alles Gute zum Geburtstag. So just before delving to the book, I would like maybe to thought about the gesture we are doing here in reading something that was published 30 years ago. I think it's quite uncommon, maybe even radical in some way. Just to explain, maybe I'll begin by saying I was 2 years ago, I went with a friend to a feminist queer bookshop here in Berlin, so that she will show me some of the titles that are that she recommends. And we started looking at it. It's huge. It's a very big bookshop. And she said, this one is amazing. It got the Google Prize, and Guggenheim that, and Guggenheim there, and this one is that, and this one is that. And all of these books were 2000, 2001, 2000, 2001, 2020, 2021, 2020, 2001. And the year was 2001. And 21. So when I reached a book 2019, it was already something. It was like I saw a book from 2019, and the year was 2021. And classics was 2016. That was like, whoa. So in some way, just to do the gesture of not publishing something new, but reading something that was published 30 years ago, think about what it means in our days, has something special in it. And it relates also to the question of canon, because this new wave of so many titles is part of our society's way to allow a lot of voices to be heard. Meaning, in a queer feminist bookshop, we will have many books by queer, by feminist, but of course also by many other identities of intersectionality, etc., etc. And there is the spirit of the big critic, like Marcel Reichardt-Nitzky or someone like that, the big patriarch, and maybe there is one here, is not there. There's no big patriarch, and we celebrate titles after titles. But I think what bothers me in this phenomenon, say, is that each identity has its niche, its rubric. We will take a book will be published because of the voice of a particular voice, which is that or that, X or Y. Whereas I think, and this is what this book is doing and consciously doing, is to try and read the canon against it. That is, and this is also my work, I try to take Thomas Mann, for instance, and see not only his Jewishness, if there is anything like that, but to see also queer feminism and, of course, post-colonialism in Thomas Mann, to sort of read Thomas Mann against Thomas Mann. And this is what I did also with Kafka and Agnon, who are like less canonical than Thomas Mann, but are maybe like the Talmud in a very interesting positionality. And this is my first question to you, actually, Daniel. To what extent do you think the Talmud is a canon or against the canon? I mean, of course, we know in Europe, the Talmud is against the canon. There is, I don't think there is any text that became such a symbol. Especially you could see it in the Third Reich. People were referring to Talmud Gaona, yeah, to a criminal, to a mischief, just by associating the Talmud. Whereas, of course, the Bible is much more innocent in that regard. A Christian book in many ways. So in that regard, I mean, of course, it's very much against the canon. But if we talk about sex and gender, etc., it's a bunch of men, and in the Jewish religion, it's the practice. So what do you think about the position of the Talmud as canon?
That's we did not prepare, so and I like it that way. I mean, but I will be thinking on my feet, as it were. So, first of all, the relationality of a canon to a canon, of course, is always a question of socio-historical positioning, right? A canon is not something that happens of itself. Things don't become a canon. They are made a canon. They're made a canon usually by teachers, right? Usually by teachers. And already about 30 years ago, I came to the conclusion that the canon consists of the most explosive literary products of a given sociocultural formation. And they are canonized so that they won't have any more explosive force. Right? That's I partly learned that from our younger son. My wife is here. From our younger son. I wanted to be sure that you didn't think that was the royal we. There are actually two parents to this. He's all grown up now, but when he was considerably younger, we were in Oxford for a summer, right? And we decided to go to Stratford to the Shakespeare Festival. But we were concerned that our young men, very early teenagers, would be bored, would reject Shakespearean plays as somehow, something. So we started to explain to the young boy about Hamlet, that we were going to see Hamlet. He said, "Oh yeah, that's the one with the ghost and the pirates and the skull." So that became for me a kind of an exemplary instance of he fortunately had not been taught Shakespeare yet. He hadn't gone to high school, and consequently, the effects of canonization, right, had not, and that became for me a very, very important way of thinking about canon, as the radical texts, radical in different ways, but radical texts that we suppress by making them boring, right? Just one more sentence on this. I discovered this partly when I encountered the different reactions to Shakespeare of American children and English children. English children hate Shakespeare, right? American children who are taught a lot less Shakespeare can still enjoy it and love it and be inspired. So that's just a general remark on canon. But canon, but within a given cultural framework, there can be more than one canon, and the canons can be like canons tend to do, shooting at each other also. My general thought is that one particular group of Jews, this is not a statement about Jews in general, but one particular historical group of Jews, namely Chazal, right? We usually call them the rabbis. I'm not using that term anymore because I think it's confusing. When I say the rabbis, people who are not really into Jewish history think about rabbis. They think about professionals, etc. Whereas what we mean historically when we say the rabbis is a very, very particular group of Jewish intellectuals who thrived from, let's say, something like the 2nd century till something like the 6th or 7th century. And they constructed, and this is getting more and more clear to me, and it has to do with Carnal Israel, which we'll come back to, I'm sure. They constructed a set of cultural forms that stand in opposition to the power of what we might call the Western canon, the Greek canon, and the Greek-inspired canon. And there'll be some more filling that in as we go along. And the first gesture I made with that insight 30 years ago was noticing how the values regarding sex and the sexual body of Chazal, these late ancient rabbis, stood almost in direct opposition to the values regarding sexuality and the body that were dominant in the patristic world at that time, and we're almost in a kind of dialect with those values. Now, lest I be mistaken or misheard, that is taken wrong, neither were very good for women. They were both bad for women, but in different ways. So there's no room for apology on the question of the gender politics. Or there are rays of light here and there, and sometimes if it's possible to combine rays of light from both sides, we can get a little bit of illumination in that direction.
Thank you. So now maybe back to the book and exactly to the point you've raised, which is, I think, the point that maybe, tell me if I'm wrong, summarizes in a way your whole endeavor, which is what happened around the time of Jesus Christ, right up to the 5th century. I mean, what happened with Chazal vis-a-vis other cultures?
Yeah.
And it's something I think that we are, it's not only you, a lot of people are dealing with it, trying to frame it. I just heard Yigal Bin-Nun, a very provocative historian, and he believes that the Jewish religion is actually the last religion because Christianity was created around that time, and then there was Islam, and the Jewish religion is actually not really Chazal. It's what came after Chazal, much, much later. So just in referring to Chazal in that way, maybe we can say they were pioneering in a great deal also vis-a-vis the Bible, because I think you can sense it in this book. Misogyny, as you said, you have it all over. But the rabbis were dealing with women in a different way, whereas the Greeks and the Bible, I believe, I don't know, tell me what you think, they're more misogynist, and it seems like they share a fear, a true fear, from a woman which has in her powers, seductive and malign. Woman and sex is malign. So this is the thing that happened back then, and it's vis-a-vis Platonism and then Neoplatonism, who were building a vertical sense of reality, meaning that the body is not the spirit. These are two different things, and not only that, the spirit is high and the body is low, meaning sex is also low, something which we should not aspire to, which we try to avoid. And that's why I thought having the title "Loving Conduct," first by taking conduct from a different title by Daniel, unheroic conduct, but secondly because conduct is performance, is doing, is something that you do by doing, like sex, but not choosing the word sex, but choosing the word love. Which we normally associate as something divine, as something much more elevated, which is incommensurable maybe in many ways with sex, with body. Body is not love. Sex is not love. So the book is mostly about that. It's about establishing a way to treat sex as something which could be very terrifying, which could be really abusive, but could be, if we take it seriously, the greatest thing we do, really the greatest conduct people do. And that's why those Chazal, those rabbis, were many times they saw it as an equivalent, or they compare it to learning Torah, which is another thing that we do. It's another conduct that we do by doing. Like this is not learning Torah. This is academia. It's something else. So let us read something. I want to read about the flesh. From the book, it's Danny's words, Boyarin's words. The early Palestinian authority, Rabbi Yehuda ben Betaira, is represented as having opposed the entire principle of immersion after sex, immersion meaning tefillah, and before the study of Torah. He opposes this idea. He gives a technical midrashic reading in support of his position, arguing that since the words of Torah are like fire, they cannot be made impure by contact with an impure person, and that there is no reason for one made impure by seminal emission. Seminal emission, I was looking for the translation. It's Keri Laila in Hebrew, and you wouldn't believe it, Pollution auf Deutsch, which is Semenerguss im Schlaf. Yeah. And that there is no reason for one made impure by seminal emission to refrain from the study of Torah. Passing through fire is one of the ways that objects become pure in rabbinical law, so the Torah would purify the one who studies it. The prohibition against the study of Torah in this state of impurity, however, did not have a technical basis in the laws of purity. Rather, it was based on a moral, psychological foundation. As the Torah had been received in a state of full concentration and spirituality, so also should it be studied. Otherwise, it will be impossible to understand why menstruating women whose state of technical impurity is identical to that of men who had seminal emission, or if anything more, would be permitted to study Torah without immersion, a point made at several junctures in the Palestinian literature. So it's also important to say that the Palestinian literature is different in the historiography that the book somewhat suggests. The Palestinian Talmud is really the opposition, whereas the Babylonian seems like there is more contiguities with other cultures, right up until until Rambam, for instance, Maimonides, who was really a Platonist in that regard. So that's why when Boyarin speaks about Chazal, it's really Chazal. It's really, we're thinking about a very specific time frame. I've talked a lot. That is just because I want to read some Resh Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan, but maybe you would like to say something.
I just want a couple of things. 30 years later, I would cross out the word spirituality. So that's the first point to make. I'm much more radical than I was, and I'm convinced more and more. And I'll give an example, an amazing example, in just a minute. That the emotions and experiences that Chazal talk about are corporeal, and that what we consider spiritual experiences are embodied and corporeal, according to Chazal. The second point that I want to make is I would completely revise, and am in the process of revising, my understanding of the relation of the Babylonian to Palestinian. I think that the more and more I see the continuities and a kind of actually radicalization that takes place in Babylonia. They had 200 years more than the Palestinians, right? The Palestinian rabbis were pretty much defeated sometime in the 5th century, and the Babylonian rabbis had another couple of hundred years of peace to work on the Babylonian Talmud. vis-a-vis the Palestinian Talmud, and I see them as more and more engaging in different ways with corporeality than even the Palestinian Talmud. So, more of a radical difference. If I don't cite the text that I want to cite a little later, remind me. Meanwhile, back to you.
Yeah. So maybe we can take off the difference between the two of them for now, but just again remember, we're talking about a culture that is in sort of opposition to what surrounds her, and then with the rabbis, not with Chazal, takes many of the things that are Platonistic or
Right.
maybe misogynistic, I don't know.
If I were to define Judaism as the cultural form of Chazal, then I'm not doing that. But if I were to do that, then Maimonides would not be a Jew.
Yeah.
He would be a halachic Muslim. So.
Yeah, so just before delving to Resh Lakish, we're going to read the classics. I'm sure a lot of you know it. I just want to say that there are many, of course, tons of different examples, but in the book, for specifically focusing on the touch between flesh and flesh. Meaning that the rabbis did not like the Chazal. I'm sorry, Chazal was opposed to, for instance, Persian culture. You remind the Persians who allegedly had the custom of having sex while being dressed. So Chazal thought it's not good. You should be. I mean, you avoid the feeling of a body and a body. And then there was also among the rabbis, really, really modern rabbis, those who thought that you should not use a condom because of that. I don't know if it's just the pleasure or the intimacy. I think it's more about the intimacy that they were beschäftigt with.
Yeah.
But the point is to look at the flesh and the blood, and to see that this thing can get warm and can get cold. So in that regard, when you talk about Torah as something which is like mind-blowing, it has something to do with fire and purifying. You have something to do with warmth in that erotic sense. So now, giving that, we can approach the classics of Rabbi Yochanan. Daniel, would you like to also read the Chazal text? Or you? Okay. So this, I'm sure most of you know, but it's so great. Why not just hearing it again? One day, Rabbi Yochanan was bathing in the Jordan. Resh Lakish saw him and thought he was a woman. He crossed the Jordan after him by placing his lance in the Jordan and vaulting to the other side. When Rabbi Yochanan saw Rabbi Shimon, the son of Lakish, which is Resh Lakish, he said to him, "Your strength is for the Torah." He, Resh Lakish, replied, "Your beauty is for woman." Yochanan said to him, "If you repent," and we don't know what, because he was a criminal. So if you repent what you just said, or if you repent that you're a criminal, which is probably what he meant, "I will give you my sister who is more beautiful than I am." So of course the homoeroticism went to that place. He got the sister, but he also got Rabbi Yochanan. He got the Torah. He agreed, Resh Lakish. He wanted to cross back the river with the lance to take his clothes, but he couldn't. which shows you that he was effeminate in one small gesture. He taught him Mishnah and Talmud, Yochanan, Resh Lakish, and made him into a great man. And then the story continues. Once they, Rabbi Yochanan and Resh Lakish, were disputing, we're talking about years after, were disputing in the study house. The sword and the lance and the dagger, from whence can they become impure? How do they become impure? Rabbi Yochanan said, from the time they are forged in fire. Resh Lakish said, from the time they are polished in the water. Rabbi Yochanan said, a brigand, a criminal, is an expert in brigandry, in being a criminal. Listim listiuto yada, ככה זה במקום?
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah, listes listiota yada.
Exactly. So after elevating him, making him one of the greatest rabbis at the time, he was, very, very evil, and this is like this story is a Greek tragedy, like par excellence. Really, this is how it works, and they're both dead at the end. But I was thinking, just because of this discussion in the book about nakedness and fire, and rethinking about my own interpretation of the story, which I wrote in my first book on Kafka and Agnon, I thought that it's interesting that Rabbi Yochanan, who is somewhat different than his colleagues, by his beauty, by his association with beauty, by his beard. He didn't have a beard, apparently. So I thought it's very interesting because he says in the halachic discussion, it becomes impure from the act. The act, Mishi Yitzrafan Ba'esh, makes it unpure. Meaning he doesn't want to have this connection. He opposes connection of flesh, of Torah, of fire, etc., etc. Whereas Resh Lakish suggests something entirely different. He suggests to have the act. And after the act, there might be something impure coming. So apart from hearing what you think about my interpretation, now I just want to hear what you have to say about all the things we raised now.
Okay. Yeah. There's a verse in Deuteronomy that enjoins us to cleave to God. Ledovka. Dovka. Dalet bet kuf. To cleave, to join ourselves to God. Yeah.
Lidvok.
Yeah. Or lead in modern Hebrew, we would probably say leidabek in nifal. Okay. Yeah. Anyway, now, according to scholarship that I recently read that was very inspiring to me, by a wonderful Tel Aviv University scholar named Adam Afterman. I wonder if that's not some kind of an emblematic or symbolic or allegorical name, but having met the man, he claims it as his name. So, yeah. He is a scholar of Philo, right? Philo, a pre-rabbinic, extra-rabbinic Jewish intellectual from Alexandria, and I believe a kind of almost bête noire for Chazal, for the Palestinian rabbis. And you'll see what I mean in a second, at least one example. So Afterman claims and shows, he doesn't claim, he argues, he shows, that Philo is the originator of the idea of unio mystica, of mystical union with God, as coming out of that verse, to cleave to God. He takes it very, very literally, that cleaving, meaning to become one with God, right? So, and he takes this verse, and Efterman shows that no one before him had done that, to mean actually becoming one with God. Now, the astonishing thing is, and I was kind of rather thrilled when I saw this connection, is that in a rabbinic text, in a very famous rabbinic text, that is Chazalic text, from about a century and a half later than Philo, something like that. We can't date things very exactly. The rabbis, Chazal, ask, is it possible for a human being to cleave to God? But God, we know, is fire. Right? And what happens to a human being who cleaves to fire? They get burned. They get burnt up. So it's impossible to imagine a human being actually cleaving to God in that sense. Right? So how do you cleave to God? Well, the earlier version of the text is a little more tame. It says, by following God's ways, right? By following their ways. That is what gluing yourself, right? And it can also mean to glue yourself to God. And then another group of speakers in that same text say, if you want to cleave to God, study stories, study Agadah, right? That is the stories that the rabbis themselves tell about God. Now, I'm suggesting in my latest thinking, 30 years after Carnal Israel, a kind of inclusio, maybe, that this is a direct response to Philo. Philo's work was suppressed, was very well known. We have plenty of evidence now that the Palestinian rabbis knew Philo's work. They never quote him directly, and we see the effects of. We discover the effects almost, the way the astronomers discovered Plato, by distortions in the orbit of Neptune, or maybe it's the opposite. They discovered Neptune by distortion. Science is really good as a set of metaphors for real intellectual life, right? I think that this is one of the texts where Philo is explicitly writing, and it becomes central, and it gets picked up. Well, we don't know a lot about Greek writing Jews after this, but it gets picked up by Christian writers as well as central to their notion of unio mystica, of being joined with God in that way. And the rabbis say, this is impossible, unimaginable, right? So therefore, to cleave to God must mean to cleave by acting in the way that we learn from the narratives that God acts. Mahu rachum He is merciful, be thou merciful. Mahu chanun, as he is gracious, be thou gracious, etc. Well, that's fine. The version of this in the Babylonian Talmud says it's impossible for a human being to cleave to God because God is fire. The question is the same as in the Palestinian versions of the text. So how do you cleave to God? By marrying the daughter of a Torah scholar. Right? Now, if we you know, I think most rabbis and professors have come across this text, just sort of, you know, their faces got red for a few minutes, and they moved on to the next page, and never actually thought through what is going on here. And it's not an unmixed blessing, but I'll talk about it a little more, and about the blessing and the unmixed part as well. Because let's go first with the kind of the good stuff, right? The corporeality of the sexual connection with the woman who has a genetic connection with a father who has spent his life immersed in Torah. It's the sexual connection that constitutes cleaving, which has very strong erotic, and therefore a man shall leave his father and mother and cleave to his wife. So right back there from Genesis, right? We've got the notion of that as being a sexual connection. They're looking for a sexual connection that will connect the human intimately, erotically, with God. But it's through the body, through corporeal sexual connection that they imagine that. It's not an allegory. It's not spiritualized, right? It's an instance, I think, of the kind of an apotheosis of corporeal intimacy, right? This so far goes quite a bit beyond Carnal Israel. I think I've come to understand this much more. Now, the fly in the ointment, of course, that on the one, it's also a reproduction of the between men structure. You know, so many European professors were the sons-in-law of their Dr. Vaters, you know, as we say here. So there, on a social level, there's something, you know, but if we can just put that aside for a minute and see exactly that this is the formation, the foundation of an erotic connection between the older man, who has presumably become Torah, right? But via the sexual connection with the daughter, one is actually imagined by the Babylonian version of this text as cleaving to God, as having, dare I say it here, as having intercourse with God, you know. So it's I think there's probably more to think about this text and more to say about it. I've just been thinking about it for about 3 days, but I think there's something there's something magical there, something very, very deep and profound, and it brings out the theme that I was first. That's a book that I wrote when I was a lot younger. I mean, 30 years ago, I was a lot younger than I am now. But I think it brings out and deepens and radicalizes some of the themes that go to the heart of what I described a few minutes ago as Chazal as producing a counterculture, almost in the modern sense, to the dominant culture of allegorization, of spirit, of imagining spirit as higher than body, and even to the extent where, certainly in some Christian groups and in some I'm always torn when I need to say the word pagan, right? Because it seems to me like it's disrespectful to Plato to call him a pagan. For instance, pagan means a country bumpkin, basically. Whatever Plato was, he was not, was not an ignoramus from the country. But on the other hand, and I'll finish this discourse by telling this story. When I first got to Berkeley to teach, after having taught in Israel, after having taught in Israel, and in my first class, I had to talk about Christians and Jews, and everybody who wasn't a Christian or a Jew. And I apologized, and I said, I'll use the word pagan as a shortcut, but I don't mean anything pejorative. And 4 hands go up in Berkeley, California. I say, yes. And they said, why are we apologizing? We're pagans. And they really meant it. I mean, that was their Berkeley founded religion. I learned a lot about modern paganism after that. Anyway, so that's just a story. Yeah.
Okay, we've talked a lot, and we want to hear you too. What do you think of that? Should I continue or right away, and then I can come back? Okay. So I wanted to read with you a passage about Yetzer Hara, the evil desire, which allegedly the Chazal. I'm trying not to say the rabbis. Chazal saw as even higher than Yetzer Tov. So let's read the passage about Rabbi Abaye. And the northern one I will remove from among you. This is a pasuk, a phrase from Joel. The northern, probably it means some imperial power, or maybe a star.
Yeah, I think probably imperial power.
Imperial power.
We know, probably talking about the Aramaean Empire.
Yeah. And now the rabbinical text, what we've just read. What is this northern one? This is the evil desire, which is hidden and present in the heart of man. And now the rest of the phrase from Joel, for it was performed mightily, the northern one, said Abaye, among the Torah scholars more than anyone, performed mightily. As in the story of Abaye, who heard a certain man saying to a woman, let us get up early and go together on the way. He, Abaye, said, I will go and separate them from doing that which is forbidden, which is a strange connection that he just interrupts in the middle of a couple walking around. He went behind them for 3 parasangs in a meadow.
Persian miles.
When they separated from each other, he heard them saying, our way is long and our company is sweet. By the way, sweetness is also something you relate to Torah. Which is interesting that it's on the one hand fire, what we associate with Indian food, and on the other hand it's sweet. So this is what they say to each other, our way is long and our company is sweet. Said Abaye, if that had been me, just because of this discourse of love, I would not have been able to control myself. He went and swung on the door hinge, a sign of desperation. I mean, it's from Shir HaShirim, Al Kapot HaManul, Livkot Al Kapot HaManul, and was miserable.
It's a sign of depression, that you go and you hang on the door and somehow...
and cry.
Yeah, and cry. Yeah.
A certain old man came by and taught him, quote, everyone who is greater than his fellow, his desire is greater also. Meaning, by rabbis, the desire is, the evil desire allegedly is stronger than by other people. And I don't remember, there was like a place that you were referring to. I think it was the Bible. Vayar Kitov, Vayar Kitov Me'od. Kitov, they interpret as the good desire or drive, whereas Vayar Kitov Me'od, Tov Me'od means the evil drive or desire.
What it's called, Tov Ma'od, the very good.
Yeah.
That's the...
Yeah, very good. Exactly. It's not just good, it's very good. So this is just to show you also about this ethos, maybe, of seeing sex as something very dangerous, but at the same time religious in the way you say religious. Yeah, it's like it's something divine. And then maybe another, just a small passage because the book deals a lot actually why Chazal were so much into sex, because they were into sex in marriage. And why they were into sex in marriage? Because they were against the idea of rape. I think this is the ethical thing that you could somehow see among as a thread throughout the texts. So this is from a footnote, and of course there are very long footnotes in the books. The Mishnah's text does not read. This is about also a text that you know very well about Yochanan and about what is love. The Mishnah, the text does not read all love which is dependent on sexual desire, but love which is dependent on something. Yeah, meaning they were relating the Mishnah. It's in Avot, I think. Said what is true love. Love which doesn't have interest, which is like the love of David and Jonathan, and whereas love who does have interest is of course the love, the rape of Amnon, of Tamar. So there was a scholar here, and you were arguing with her or with him, Adler. So you are saying the Mishnah does not read all love which is dependent on sexual desire, but love which is dependent on something. Yeah? It's not sex. It's being dependent on something. Love that has an ulterior motive versus love which is disinterested, doesn't have any interest. The point of the comment is that love that grows out of the fulfillment of some particular need in the lover is not true love and will last only as long as the need exists and the beloved is fulfilling it. And then you also mentioned the Torah, which says that he actually hated Tamar after fulfilling his desire. So maybe Professor Boyarin, you'll say something, and then we'll open.
No, I'm in favor of opening the conversation.
So I will ask those of you who identify as men to wait 3 minutes till 5 minutes and give others the possibility to raise their hand. Yes, please.
Thank you. So, going back to the moment, to the place where, if you want to cleave to God, you should marry the rabbi's daughter. I haven't read the book yet. It's on my exam list, so it's coming up. So I don't know if you referred to this or no, but my immediate thought was, a student will end up marrying the teacher's daughter and have sex with her, and thus she will be the channel for him actually to have sex with the father. I don't know if you wrote about this, so maybe I'm just saying something obvious. So this is what the idea that came to me, because this is where the knowledge is. It's not a question, unfortunately. The question is where you take this.
Yeah, well, I mean, that was the moment of implicit and even explicit critique that I referred to. This pattern, which Eve Sedgwick wrote 25 years ago, the book Between Men, showing how much of the eroticism between men is channeled through the marriage with a daughter, or in Rabbi Yochanan Reish Lakish's with a sister. But so that is the more commonplace interpretation here, right? And it's certainly part of the pattern. But I'm suggesting that the way that this Chazal text puts it is somehow that plus another dimension that is more powerful than just the politics of the politics of the academy of the German 19th century or Oxford, Cambridge type academies. And by the way, it's not the rabbi's daughter. It's not, it's the daughter of a Torah scholar. So it's not about hierarchy in that sense, but it's about a tripled, not just doubled, tripled erotic relation with the woman, through the woman with her father, I agree, and through the father, the Torah, which is almost identical with God in this imagination.
If I can say shortly, and then, you know what? Go ahead, please. No, you.
Yeah.
A very simple question. I've never understood, and I read this passage in your book, but I never understood the relationship between the Yetzer Hara and the erotic drive. I don't think they are supposed to be identical, are they?
Yes.
They are. The Yetzer Hara is...
The Yetzer Hara is identical.
Okay. I never got that.
Right. And the term comes, Yetzer Hara means the evil inclination, literally. But it's an older term, and it comes out of a culture such as Qumran, an earlier stage of Jewish culture, in which sexuality was considered evil. And
it's like the hereditary sin in Catholicism.
And then the rabbis, the Chazal, take it and flip its meaning over by saying, Tov, good, is the good thing. Tov ma'od, very good, is the you know. So there's the paradox, but that paradox is, you know, an analogy, for instance, taking the way we have taken up the word queer, which was a term of opprobrium, and flipped it over. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, just to relate to Rafi's questions, I was not dealing a lot with many passages in the book that relate to, I think, what you were referring to, which is the extent of women studying, or their woman's relation towards Torah, and there is a lot in the book, and it's also very much contested and very, very polyphonic. Right from the Mishnah, you have Ben Azai, who believes women should study Torah, and it gives them a lot of good points. You know, Chazal are dealing always with Rechnungen. Yeah. But you have different opinions. I was just focusing really on the idea of sex, and I think this example shows you that, of course, I'm in love with the Torah scholar or the father, or I'm fascinated by him, or I want to imitate him, but I do it through sex, also through sex, and this is the different thing they showed in this, perhaps, ethos in relating to the body and sex is something very positive.
Yeah.
Yes. Please.
Just a very short remark on the you can hear me? Okay. Yes. Short remark on the Tov Me'od, because I remember now, I forgot, that in the Star of Redemption, actually, Rosenzweig explains this passage, and he cites Rashi. Tov Me'od, he says, not only this is the Yetzer Hara, but it's death. So he's actually introducing the death drive, in a way, connected to sexuality and the Yetzer Hara, which I find very interesting, because the Tov is just yes. It's nothing more than yes. And Tov Me'od means differentiation, ephemerality, like anything that has to do with comparing, or like putting a relationship, which is absolutely what we are doing inside the text. It's all the time sort of working with relations. So it's sort of just the way it's discussed here is it introduces the nervousness and the mangel, the kind of desire that is connected to the nothing, to not yet or no longer. The whole desire, the erotic, is the me'od, in the way it's connected to the death drive. So it's just that I forgot and it came back to me, maybe.
Yeah, but thank you. I think it's very much the thing. Tov Me'od is a bit tough, but too much.
I don't think that's Rosenzweig's finest moment. It sounds a little more like Taubes.
But it's not far from how you explained it, actually.
Yeah.
Not far.
It's actually depending on the difference between Yetzer Hara Mamash and Yetzer Hara.
We can look for it afterwards and see the exact passage. Do you remember, Daniel?
Oh, no, well, it's not, I mean, I can demonstrate that Yetzer Hara is exactly sexual desire. When it's Bavli Chulin, I think it's page 100a, when the Jews, I don't know many texts by heart, but the ones that I've worked with, I know. When the Jews came back from the exile, the evil instinct was still dancing. Was still dancing among them. So they sent a shard up to heaven to ask a fraga, a shaila. What can we do with this this evil instinct that makes us worship idols? And it came down that you have permission to kill him. So they killed the Yetzer Hara, for idol worship, the evil instinct for idol worship. And Jews didn't want to worship idols anymore, right? Until neoliberalism came along, but that's a different story. So so they said, well, that really worked. Let's kill the other Yetzer Hara, right? Why not? Why shouldn't we kill the other one? So they captured the Yetzer Hara, the evil instinct, and he said, there might be. The Yetzer Hara, said to them, there might be unintended consequences here. Watch out. So they put him in prison, right? They put him in prison, and 3 days later, they noticed that there was no more milk left in the world, there were no more eggs left in the world, and nobody was going out and building a house and marrying. There were not going to be any more children, right? So it's very clear. Or in the story about Abaye, which I'm not sure just reading the story, we got the force of it. He hears two unmarried people say, let's travel together, a man and a woman, right? And he says, I better watch them because who knows what temptations they'll fall into. And they walk the whole morning, and they either shake hands or don't shake hands, but they turn to each other and they said, it was so pleasant walking with you along the way and talking, and they separate. And Abaye observes of himself, had he been there in such pleasant company with a woman, he would not have been able to restrain himself, right? And from that, the text derives, or maybe even Abaye himself, that the more Torah a person has, the stronger their Yetzer Hara is. That is, the stronger their desire is. And I tried to interpret that to a certain extent. Yeah. No, in a sense, though, maybe coming back to Raphael's point in a slightly different way, the Chazal had not read Freud, and yet there are so many Freudian themes, in a sense, or insights that Freud had. Reish Lakish vaults across on his lance across the water in pursuit of a sexual object, gets deflected from that and becomes a student of Torah. He can't vault anymore, right? So the phallic symbol is right there. In a sense, this is giving credit to Freud for having had some really powerful insights. I mean, it's not, Freud is not, I think, something that we have to either take or leave. There's a lot that can be learned from Freud, and obviously there are many things that we find now highly implausible. Yeah.
I invite, those who identify as men.
Thank you, Chana, Professor. I'd just like to ask, what are the political implications, or what is the political significance of all of this talk tonight? Thank you. Today.
It's interesting. I mean, I would say that the Jews are doing a very good job of spoiling their name in the world right now, and anything that, I'm not talking about apologetics, but anything that enriches and nuances and presents a sense of the liveliness of Jewish culture, and its messiness, is a cultural political act on behalf of the continued existence of the Jews.
I would also add that we are working here against the grain just by reading something that was written 30 years ago. In many ways, it's politics. I think also relating to sex, I wanted to raise that before. I think it's very much of the time to have sex in the title. And I thought of, I don't know how to use ChatGPT, but I wanted to ask someone to try and see if you have sex today in titles, because it's part of the title of the book. And I sort of I think we will not find that many.
Oh, that's interesting. That's interesting.
Yeah, so just by referring to sex, maybe, and of course, by referring to love, you do politics.
Yeah. When I handed the book in, they told me it would take 1.5 years to publish it at the University of California Press. And I said, you need to publish it fast, because right now people are interested in sex. Who knows if they'll still be interested 1 year from now.
Wow. Today they would say publish it now and not in a month, because what will happen in a month?
Yeah.
We don't know. Yeah.
Anyway.
Yes, Elad.
There is a long tradition of identifying and criticizing, let's say, major strands in Western culture, Platonism, Paulinism, Christianity, as disconnected from the body, spiritualizing, metaphysical, and so forth. So Nietzsche would be a case in point. And also within modern Jewish thought, there has been currents either directly inspired or not from Nietzsche. For example, Zionism, accusing diaspora, rabbinic Judaism in being disconnected from the body, the Muskel Judentum of Nordau, or even Harav Kook, accusing the old Orthodoxy of being too Christianized, in a sense, too disconnected from the body, and so forth. So I wonder, you're definitely not doing Rav Kook and Muskel Judentum, because you also wrote Unheroic Conduct. So I wonder if you can position more specifically your thrust in this bigger map of critique of the devaluation of the body.
Because muscles are erotic. Muscles are erotic.
Yeah, that's true, certainly. But you know, there are kinds of politics that I take up very, very powerfully and directly, and I think that my latest book that's actually published already, The No State Solution, is a very and there are other kinds of political activities that are very subtle and complex. I would not characterize historical traditional Judaism as disconnected from the body. It's largely disconnected from violence, and that's what the Zionists mean by reconnecting with the body. They mean becoming soldiers. Until I did a study of, from the book that came after this, For Unheroic Conduct, I did a study for one chapter of illustrated Haggadot of Pesach, and particularly going back into the Middle Ages, when the first illustrated Haggadot, always the wicked son is a soldier, right? Of some sort of a knight in armor on a horse is the wicked son, right? The first time you see a soldier holding a gun as the wise son is in Zionist Haggadot from the 1930s. So if that's what return to the body means, I'm not interested in that body.
Yes, and if I can add, there's no relation really to forms of body in Chazal, I think. You can see kochacha la Torah, you have power, but you wouldn't see, I mean, and you see the Romach, but not more than the Romach. And of course, Rabbi Yochanan, the epitome of beauty, when they describe his beauty, and they do it, and you know it, what I mean, it's something which is very, how will we say, diverse. This is how I will define it. It's very much diverse. So I think maybe Chazal could offer us also a way of engaging with the body as something attractive, which doesn't necessarily means X or Y or Z. Yeah.
Just one more thought on this. Another way of thinking about that Romach, that spear or whatever it was that Reish Lakish operated with to get to Rabbi Yochanan, that didn't work afterwards. It doesn't necessarily only have to be read sexually, and perhaps he was wicked. He was a brigand. That means a man of violence. And once he accepts Torah, right, his spear is broken. So it can certainly be read from that, and he is considered also a beautiful man. He totally renounces violence in the Babylonian versions, not in the Palestinian versions of his life. That's another complexity. Yeah.
Question here. Just to continue Elad's question a little bit. Still, if you read the Hilchot Tzniut in Shulchan Aruch, for example, it's very remote from the concept of sexuality that you relate to Chazal, or from the story of Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan. So even within rabbinic Judaism, there is a process of it becomes much harder and much stricter. So my question would be, what went wrong?
Philosophy.
Okay.
That was the disaster. That was my answer.
That's
yeah,
an interesting
no,
answer.
I mean, but obviously there are cultural changes, and that's why I'm very careful, more careful now than I was 30 years ago, not to talk about Judaism, which I think anyway is a very problematic construct. You know, I've written another book, but if you just live long enough, it seems you end up writing about everything. So I recommend it, you know, to young scholars, just live. Live long and prosper. To quote that great Jew.
Can you elaborate about philosophy?
Yeah, no, I think, seriously, I think from the Middle Ages, the impact of Aristotelian metaphysics does introduce spirit-body distinctions in certain, certainly in certain communities of Jewish thought and practice, or that really, in some ways, reverse the. I mean, to take perhaps a somewhat less fraught example, is the way that Midrash gets eradicated in favor of interpretation, which is, of course, very, very much a Hellenic Christian, carried on by Christian practice. Right? And yeah.
Okay. We can finish now, but we can also continue if someone wants to ask. No?
I was wondering all the time about Alcibiades, Plato's Alcibiades, which is in this context very interesting because in a certain sense Alcibiades, which has enormous Yetzer Hara, which has enormous desire, sexual desire, but also a desire for hegemony, for politics. And Socrates refuses his body. But he refuses his body in order to re-challenge this desire. Actually, he says, well, I can't give you my body now because your desire would go into the wrong direction. But potentially, he could give his body, and with giving his body would mean also giving wisdom, the wisdom necessary for Alcibiades to become a real politician, which is not a politician, but an homme politique, somebody who really knows about the truth and could implement it in society. So is this not a position somewhere between the Chazal thought and what would become philosophy then?
Yeah, I'm going to make an old man's gesture. I wrote a book called Socrates and the Fat Rabbis, in which I have a very detailed and lengthy reading of the symposium. So I'm not going to, try to sum it up now. But your question is a very good one, and I'll send you the book.
I think that Alcibiades is very different from the symposium in this regard. The Alcibiades. The Alcibiades, Plato's Alcibiades.
You mean the dialogue? Well, yeah, but
it's very different from.
That's an interesting question, because there's a question whether it's really Socratic or it isn't Socratic. So I really focused on Alcibiades in the symposium.
I think
yeah,
it's different.
Yeah, it's a kind of secondary elaboration, I think, of the certainly of the material which is in the symposium. Yeah. So.
He doesn't need Socrates' daughter to mediate.
Right.
Of course, this is one of the decisive points.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe someone? Very last? Okay, so thank you very much. It was a pleasure. Gad?
Well, I'm going to respond as a proper German scholar. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Danny. Thank you, Carnal. And thank you all for being